It went well. I've loved getting to talk to Clayton White, Dow Loggins, and Jabari Ellis as well. So always cool to get insight, especially a guy like Dow Loggins who has watched this from the other side for basically 20 years as an offensive coordinator in the NFL. He mentioned he went to 12 to 15 of these things a year when he was on that side, and now on this side, being a coach, feeling more nervous than those times because now it's his guys out there going to and having to perform and prove themselves to NFL scouts.
Yeah, and none of this was on my bingo card today. Like, talking to Dow Loggins, talking to Clayton White, Jabari Ellis, being on the radio here. I mean, really, again, appreciate it. But I think we knew what we were going to expect. Seeing Spencer Rattler, Xavier Legette, Trey Knox, guys like that go out there and shine. But it's also good to see other guys like Turbo Miller, for instance, getting a shot and making the most of it. So I think a very big day for South Carolina.
Absolutely. I believe Coach Beamer's doing his hit with SEC Network down there with Peter Burns. So a lot going on here, a lot of cool people to see, and we are wrapping up here out at Pro Day. It's been a fun time. Certainly appreciate the University of South Carolina Athletic Department for allowing us to be out here to witness this in person. Talk to the people that we got to talk to. Yeah, literally Steve Fink was bringing people by segment, just kind of pointing and saying, "You want to talk to this guy?" Of course we did. So thanks to the guy Steve Fink. He's the man, and certainly does so much for us when we come out to these kind of things. But that'll wrap it up for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Been out at USC Pro Day. Coming up next is the halftime show with myself when I get back to the studio in a few minutes, and Dimitri Ravenos coming up next right here on the game.
And all of your custom framing needs. That could be diplomas, original artwork, canvases, jerseys, flags. Maybe you've got a signed autograph print that you want to have framed up to throw on the wall in the man cave. They can handle that for you as well. They've been in business for over 20 years. Head on over to 511 12th Street, West Columbia. In store, there's an art gallery, home decor, furniture, and gift items, all available for you there. If you have questions or you want to set something up, call them today, 803-739-1337. They're open Tuesday to Friday, 10 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., and then Saturday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. You can also give them a follow on Instagram at Goldline Framing SC. Again, that's our friends at Goldline Framing in West Columbia. Call them today. Call them right now, 803-739-1337.
Dimitri Ravanis in today for Terry Ford. Tyler Head going to join me here momentarily. He is hustling back from Pro Day as plenty of scouts, plenty of coaches in town to watch the Gamecocks, looking to make it on the next level in the NFL. So he'll come by in just a minute, but right now it's just you, me, and Captain Dave. Salute, sir.
Oh, hi there.
Dave, I wanted to bring you in here because yesterday you bore witness to probably the most phone calls I have ever seen us take on the air here at 107.5 The Game on a single topic. We talk about football religiously, as you would in any SEC market. When the baseball team or men's basketball team have it rolling as they do this year, we talk plenty about them. But, Dave, people were on fire ready to talk about the Gamecock women yesterday.
Yes, indeed. And they were mad, and I saw it on Twitter, too.
Yep.
Mad at LSU, mad at their team, mad at what they did and what they got away with.
And, look, I think part of that anger is what drove the pride, but I also heard a lot of pride in what Dawn Staley has accomplished and the way she and her team carried themselves in the aftermath of that fight and of that game. Basically, just sort of wanting to give voice to the idea that this woman is maybe the greatest representative we have of the university here, certainly in the athletic department at least, and that deserves to be celebrated. As much as we throw slings and arrows at Kim Mulkey, Columbia wants to see the same effort put into heaping praise on Dawn Staley.
That is true. So many people said she's class,
right,
and Mulkey is classless.
So let me sort of build on what the next logical question there is. 803-404-6100. That is both the Love Chevy phone line and the Firehouse Subs text line if you want to get involved in the show. What is left for Dawn Staley to do at USC? What keeps her coming back to lead the Gamecock women? I mean, is it as simple as she is chasing the measurables, that she wants to get that same number of championships or whatever the equivalent would be in the modern era of women's basketball to Pat Summitt and Gino Auriemma? I mean, is that the challenge that's in front of her? Because she's got 2 national titles already. She has been the SEC Coach of the Year now a record 8 times. I don't know. Like, at some point, I think anybody in a competitive field wants to be challenged again. And certainly women's college basketball is more competitive than it has ever been. But sometimes I look at Dawn and see somebody this just comes so easy to.
Well, I think, first of all, I think she loves it. It's been in her life ever since she was young. And I think she loves her players. She loves being with them. She loves coaching. And, yeah, the rewards and the winning championships, she loves that too. And I think, yeah, she's trying to accomplish that. And I think she will, and she wants to stay at it. I don't think she's going to leave for the WNBA.
Yeah.
Ever, which is what everybody says, oh, she'll be a great coach. I mean, people have even said she could coach in the NBA. She could coach men's teams in college. I don't think that's what she wants to do. I think she loves women's basketball.
Well, I think it was clear if you watch the game on ESPN afterwards. I'm going to play you what she said about her players and about being the coach of this team. Everything Dave said is true, and Dawn Staley does not keep it a secret that there is part of being a coach in college basketball that really fulfills her.
It's cool. When you're dealing with young lives, that's what they want. They aspire to become WNBA players. And the fact that we had a lottery pick who came off the bench for us, that's an example of if you're talented, you're gonna make it to the league. You're gonna find a way to make it to the league. You just have to be patient. So I'm super proud of all of them for just their process. They don't play as much as they want to play. They can go start on other teams, but they choose to stay here and come here, win championships, do it the right way, and hopefully have some longevity in playing pro basketball.
Dawn is awesome. There's a reason this town, this state, this fan base loves her so much, and you hear it right there. But I do point this out. 2 national championships. I think a lot of us believe that she is in line for a 3rd this year. She is 53 years old. Roy Williams retired at age 69. Coach K retired at age, I believe, 74. At 53, if Dawn Staley did decide, hey, I do want the challenge of doing what I did in college in the WNBA, or hey, I do want to be the first woman to cross over and coach men's college basketball, there's plenty of time for her to build a whole second life, a whole second legacy, if she really wanted to. Now, I'm not advocating for that. I am simply asking, when you get to the point of dominance that Dawn Staley is, and whether or not the amount of championships bear it out, you can tell just by the number of ads that put her front and center, talking about college basketball, not women's college basketball, I mean college basketball, period. The reputation of Dawn Staley is this is the best women's coach and maybe the best coach in college basketball right now. So at some point, if you're a Gamecocks fan, don't you wonder if even it's just going to get to the flirtation? Remember, Coach K flirted with going to the Los Angeles Lakers in 2004. What keeps her coming back? 803-404-6100. Let's go to Dwayne, who is out in Sumter and listening today. Dwayne, obviously the success is something to celebrate. How long do you expect it to keep going for?
It's like this. I really do think that she has that ability to coach the men's or boys team. And I do think that's a daunting task, but at the same time, I think that's something she would kind of venture into. Because when you establish everything you just have established and still establishing, I think there's great reward for her. And I really think that she can do it. And, I'm looking forward that she might make an announcement, hey, anytime. But I think that's something that's a challenge to her, and she can enjoy that she could do and go forward with it.
Yeah, I appreciate the call, Dwayne. I mean, I think it is a possibility. I don't know if I would say it is a likelihood, but I think when we look at the women that have been successful in coaching college basketball, the women that have put together the kind of resume that Dawn Staley has. I mean, you think about Buffett McGraw at Notre Dame. Obviously, you think about Pat Summitt at Tennessee. Even Gino Auriemma, who obviously is a man. But I think the one thing that you see across all of these that Dawn is very different from is that there is a sort of parental nature to the way they deal with their parents, or excuse me, their players rather. And obviously, Carolina players look up to Dawn and count her as one of the most influential women in their lives, right? Almost a mother figure. But the way Dawn carries herself is not as an authority figure. Dawn carries herself as kind of the coolest person in the room sometimes. I think back to when Bomani Jones interviewed her on HBO, and she showed up in a Gucci sweatsuit for that. And Bomani even made the remark that she has more swag than anyone else in the studio. I think those kind of things resonate with 18 and 19-year-old men in a way that has them viewing her, viewing any authority figure, in a different light. Now, that being said, we talk about men's college basketball as if it is the obvious next step. What if it is the WNBA? Dawn was a successful player, right? Part of the reason that she has been able to fit in and be so comfortable in Columbia is the fact that her WNBA career began and lasted an extended period of time in Charlotte. Maybe she wants to go back. Maybe she wants to build that next dynasty. I don't know if you've been keeping up with the WNBA, but the league seems very invested in making sure LA, Las Vegas, and New York have all of the stars. What if she wants the challenge of going to Indiana to be with Aaliyah Boston and build up something new, something different, something interesting in the WNBA? I think that she has the ability to get over something that plenty of college coaches have struggled with regardless of the sport, which is, do you know how to treat professionals differently than how you would treat kids? I think Dawn is a universally beloved, universally respected figure across all of not just college sports, but American sports in general at this point. I don't even think she necessarily needs a third national championship to validate that. I think that what she was able to do this year is all the proof that anybody needs, that she is the type of person you want leading your program, franchise, whatever the case may be. She took a team that saw insane amounts of turnover and did exactly what they did last year. Undefeated regular season, ready to bring it back and hopefully this time close things out with a championship in the NCAA tournament. Certainly a lot of us are expecting that. A lot of us are hoping for that rematch with Iowa because I think that there is a public perception outside of the SEC footprint that everything runs through Caitlin Clark. It doesn't, right? Caitlin Clark's got to get past Carolina a second time because the team is better than the player. The team of South Carolina is better than the team of Iowa. And I would take the Gamecocks in a rematch with the Lady Hawkeyes, but we are still, a little under a week now away from finding out even if or when those teams have the opportunity to match up in the Final Four or the national championship game. The other thing I want to talk about as it relates to Dawn and other college coaches is very interesting, and it is the way she approaches the idea that these kids are here for their future. You've heard, since the NIL era began, you've heard a lot of coaches across various sports bemoaning the way it has changed the mindset of what kids come into college athletics wanting. I don't think you've really heard Dawn waver. In fact, it is the thing, that idea that, quote-unquote, NIL has changed everything, that has some of the best coaches in the history of their sports, Coach K, Nick Saban, et cetera, saying, okay, I think I'm done. We saw it in college football this year. A number of coaches that said, okay, I think I'm done. Excuse me, I think I'm ready to move from college to the NFL because there I just get to coach ball. I don't think you have ever once heard Dawn say this has become too hard. We will dive into that a little bit more coming up because what I think Nick Saban has admitted was his undoing doesn't seem to be a problem for Dawn Staley. Tyler Head will join me in just a moment. We will take your calls as well at 803-404-6100. I am Demetri Ravanis in for Terry Ford today on the Halftime Show. One thing I was struck by yesterday, and really I'm always struck by it watching Dawn Staley speak, is just the joy she has for watching her players get the opportunities, I guess, accomplish the things that they do. There is no regret, I guess, about what the state of the sport they are playing in is. And maybe it's easy to say, look, women's college sports, particularly college basketball and college softball, are on this popularity rise that other sports just are not enjoying right now. Maybe it's that simple. Or maybe it's that Dawn Staley looks at the state of college sports and doesn't see a black void that so many coaches seem to paint the picture of. I mean, Nick Saban was on Capitol Hill today. Ted Cruz was running a roundtable on NIL. Why? I don't know. But Nick Saban was there, and he made these comments to Chris Lowe of ESPN earlier that NIL and the way players are receiving payments now completely changed everything he thought he knew about college football. He echoed those sentiments today.
All the things that I believed in for all these years, 50 years of coaching, no longer exist in college athletics. So it's always was about developing players. It was always about helping people be more successful in life. My wife even said to me, we'd have all the recruits over on Sunday with their parents for breakfast, and she would always meet with the mothers and talk about how she was going to help and impact their sons and how they would be well taken care of. And she came to me, like right before I retired and said, why are we doing this? And I said, what do you mean? She said, all they care about is how much you're going to pay them. They don't care about how you're going to develop them.
Look, it's a sentiment that you hear a lot from college coaches, and you always very quickly, and Saban is right there with them, you always very quickly hear those coaches come back and say, oh, I'm not against players having the opportunity to get paid. Just, here's my angry old man rant before I even get in to that part of things. I think that Dawn Staley constantly pushing forward, hey, this is the opportunity. This is what these ladies are coming to Columbia to accomplish, and I am all for it. I am their biggest ally. I am their greatest champion. I think it's what makes it possible to have a season like they had this year, which is you lose all your starters, you lose real talent off the bench to the WNBA draft, and you come back with another undefeated regular season. That doesn't just happen, right? That is about a culture, that is about a pro really embracing what it means to do her job well. The Carolina women, Dave, I think you would agree with this, even with what SEC football is. Carolina women's basketball is the most visible team in this city.
Absolutely.
They are the headliners, right? And maybe that is part of what keeps Dawn coming back, right? Like, where else are you going to find a situation where the women's basketball team basically gets to dictate the tastes of the town?
That's absolutely correct. And you've seen it grow since she came here. I mean, when she came here, it was still like, yeah, just 1,000 people may show up. And now they fill the CLA. Everybody's excited about it. People talk about it all the time. And, there was a time when if we talk about women's basketball on this station, people, why are you talking about that?
I'm glad you brought that up. The last time I was here and Tyler and I were doing this show together, and I'm not talking about yesterday, I mean back in like December, I think. We talked about the fact that the men were getting ready to start conference play, and we got a text that said, hey, if you're going to waste our time talking basketball, at least talk about the women. It's like, man, that is not something you ever would have expected to hear not that long ago. Look, I don't think it's an ego thing, or maybe I should say I don't think it's just an ego thing. Or maybe it's a forgivable ego thing, right? Dawn likes the spotlight here that she's not going to get elsewhere. And I'm not saying that as like an indictment of women's basketball. I think it is a combination of the team success and her ability to navigate celebrity. I think she's really good at it. And I think that's really important for attracting the top kids to your program.
I agree 100%. I think she's great at it. She's a great ambassador is what the word people used to use, but she's great for the university as well.
Yeah, we talked yesterday about the Garnet Trust and Carolina Rise merging into this one well-aligned NIL collective and what could be accomplished there. As a result, I think you are going to hear a lot of coaches talk about it positively, at least in a front-facing way, because they recognize that, you know, the best way to have success in recruiting is just to not get in your own way. And in the SEC, we have seen a lot of examples of various schools with multiple collectives thinking they are the ones that are going to get to call the shots, and everybody ends up with hurt feelings. I think when you have somebody out in front of your biggest program like Dawn, who not only is a great recruiter, not only is a great coach, but like I said, really courts what it means to be visible, what it means to be a celebrity, and you have that alignment on NIL, whatever is happening on Capitol Hill today with these athletic directors and coaches and legal experts complaining or defending the current system, I think it becomes a secondary concern for a school like South Carolina, or at least it should be. I mean, admittedly, NIL is not a perfect system. It's not even a good system, but we are at a point where the majority of Americans recognize, the majority of sports fans recognize that the old way of doing things, the quote-unquote student athlete, it's not realistic anymore. And we've got to figure out a way that this works to get these athletes the money they deserve and not change the sports we love too much. Certainly things are going to change. That is not sports. That is not technology. That is just the nature of the world. Things change. And it's a matter of who is best prepared for it that will have the best chance of succeeding. Pete Nakos was on Capitol Hill today. He was covering those hearings for the folks at On3.com. What was said? Did anything get solved? Are we still in this very public performance space when it comes to people trying to figure out what is right and what is wrong and where we're going as it relates to NIL? He's going to join us coming up next here on the halftime show. And I assume at some point Tyler Head is going to join us as well. I'm Demetri Ravanis in for Terry Ford today on 107.5 The Game and on the Game Network. Pete Nakos covers college sports business and the transfer portal for On3.com. He was in Washington today, keeping an eye on what was happening on Capitol Hill. Pete joins us now. Pete, explain to me exactly how it is they were billing this thing. I know Ted Cruz organized it. Nick Saban was there. Greg Byrne, Alabama's athletic director, was there. I believe the ACC's commissioner was there. What was the purpose of this, and how was it being, I don't know, explained to the public?
Yeah, Senator Ted Cruz, obviously, senior senator from Texas, put together this roundtable, which was dubbed like an NIL roundtable. I think a lot of people kind of heading into it got the vibe that this was going to be, okay, we're going to debate NIL collectives and talk about how the NCAA just needs so much help. And walking away, I think there's some real confidence that something could actually get done. I think that it was a really productive conversation surrounding revenue sharing and employment. And I think the other thing, too, is right, everyone's going to always have a different opinion on employment and should athletes be, college athletes be employees. And that is the $4 billion question facing college sports. But on the flip side, I think a lot of people were encouraged to hear that across the board, a lot of people do back revenue sharing, and that both the Democratic and Republican sides of Congress kind of seem to be in unison that, hey, now could be the time to actually do something.
So that is the question that I think I always have whenever, whether it be Ted Cruz or Tommy Tuberville or whoever wants to bring the future of college sports to Congress's floor, is why? Why is the NCAA so confident that it cannot do anything without the help of lawmakers at this point? Is it because they were so unwilling to do anything in 2021 when NIL came into being, or is there really some sort of level of authority that is needed to get what really is the wild, wild west under control to make some progress?
That's a great question, and it's the jam-packed one, and what I've been trying to kind of unravel for months now. I think where you need to start is the NCAA for decades on end, right, always tried to push back on this idea of athletes cashing in on their name, image, and likeness. So, yeah, when it did all kind of come to pass in July 2021, the NCAA wasn't ready. They didn't put the right not legislation, but right rules in place, and that is kind of why you end up where you are right now. On the flip side, though, right, you look, the NCAA is facing preliminary injunctions involving the transfer portal and NIL in different states right now. And if you had asked me the same question in July, I think I would probably tell you, like, the NCAA is a joke. They should actually try to do this themselves. I think it's starting to become more and more evident that the NCAA is just going to continue to lose in court. So, yes, right. to an extent, and I'm not defending the NCAA because they've obviously put themselves in the position for years upon years of just really not doing right by athletes. But, yeah, I think at this point that Congress does probably need to step in and set some guidelines and create the state preemption of state laws and maybe come up with a model for revenue sharing. And NCAA President Charlie Baker's obviously tried to help quite a bit, but I think that at the end of the day, it's going to have to be Congress to get this just that one step further.
Pete Nakos is on the phone with us. He covers college sports business and the transfer portal for On3.com. Pete, one thing that I found really interesting in looking over who was there today is I didn't see an obvious voice of the players in this process. Am I wrong? Did I just not know what I was looking for? Were they really not represented?
The Kavanaugh twins were there, right? The NIL stars, the basketball players. I think what the Kavanaugh twins have accomplished in NIL is astounding. And how they have been able to meld college sports with being social media influencers should not be undervalued whatsoever. The one voice, though, that continues to kind of be absent in these conversations is like a legitimate college football star. Mm-hmm. And I think that would go a long way. And that's not a shot at the Capitals. They're really well spoken about some of their thoughts. And then in the previous hearing, UCLA quarterback Chase Griffin who's also a really big athlete advocate, has spoken. But I think that we need to have an open conversation. The Congress needs to have an open conversation with an athlete who has gone through the college football transfer portal, was made big bucks, and is pretty well thought of as an athlete.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Cavender twins. I think you could throw LSU gymnast Olivia Dunn in there as well. Look, they are successful athletes, and certainly they don't get the attention that they do without their standing on whatever team it is they are on. But it's so easy to look at them as social media stars first because women's college basketball, even though the popularity is on the rise, same with college gymnastics, it's not football, right? Like that is the sport that there's a reason that Nick Saban gets invited to this and say Dawn Staley doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, I just think right at the end of the day, we're talking about things on Capitol Hill right now, but by Friday we'll probably be having a really interesting, legitimate conversation about college football playoff and how that's going to shape the future of college sports too. So, I mean, there's no secrets here. Like the revenue sports are college football, men's basketball, and all the dollars are really in college football these days. So, yeah, I mean, spot on. And if I could just riff on that real quick, I mean, Nick Saban was pretty fascinating today. Right? He talks about how he's a fan of NIL, but he's not a fan of what it's become with collectives and donor-funded organizations. And then he says how he wants revenue sharing, but is not a fan of athletes becoming employees. And then at one point, Senator Ted Cruz asked him point blank, so, is this why you retired? And, yeah, he basically admits that, in his opinion, the reason why he fell in love with coaching and did it for 50 years is just not kind of the central point of college football anymore.
Yeah, what I have always thought with Nick Saban, just following him as I have, is it's not just a matter of players being able to cash in and NIL collectives. I think there is an element of, until the schools are paying players directly, NIL collectives are always going to give some control of your roster over to the boosters. And I think Alabama fans and college football fans know famously, that is what he hated and was so wary of when he first got to Alabama, was how much in control of the program the boosters were. And I think that is what his ultimate fear is with NIL collectives.
Yeah, it's so interesting too, right? And I think that'd be really naive not to say this, right? You also need to realize that Nick Saban has made millions of dollars coaching college football players,
of course,
right? And those college football players haven't been able to make any money off the revenue that they generate. So it's really a double-edged sword, I guess you could say. And the other thing, too, right, is Saban talks about revenue sharing, which is obviously a plus, but not employee status. I mean, at the end of the day, that still gives these colleges some control over athletes, right? Like, hey, we'll give you a little bit more of the care, but we're not going to let you really call the shots.
Yeah. Pete Nakos covers college sports in the transfer portal for On3.com. He was on Capitol Hill today watching Ted Cruz's NIL roundtable. Do you feel like anything significant got accomplished? Are we in a different place after that roundtable than we were before it?
I don't know if we're in a different place, but you can't walk away from that if you're the NCAA and not feel a little bit more encouraged that, wow, it might get done. I mean, all that said, though, right, Ted Cruz admitted to some reporters after, there's probably a 50-50 chance anything comes from Congress in this cycle, and it's going to happen in the next 2 months because of the 2024 presidential election and just kind of have it impact things on the Hill. So, I mean, I think the really encouraging thing as a spectator, right, is for so long it was just in these hearings and roundtables, it was just people cheering for the West Virginia women's basketball team and someone saying oh man, I hate those collectives. And I think today was actually a pretty legitimate, real conversation about where college sports is headed and how athletes deserve to have a share of revenue. And that part is encouraging. I think time will only tell if it's legitimately encouraging or if today was just a day that kind of stood out.
The Dartmouth men's basketball team was brought up in this roundtable, and their decision to unionize obviously is going to be pointed to a lot as a part of the catalyst for this. But I wonder how much EA Sports video game coming back and all of the announcements around it sort of have spurred a new sense of urgency amongst stakeholders inside the NCAA.
In what way?
I wonder if they recognize that this is just the beginning. I mean, you saw a star, like, not a star on the field, but a star in name, like Arch Manning, decide to sit out the game, that the paycheck was not necessarily enough for him. There are going to be other opportunities like this. I'm sure there are people that are wondering if a college football game is going to be the opening of the door to a college basketball game or a college baseball game down the road, and are these bigger national or even in some cases international projects going to be put in front of athletes for an opportunity that is more than just posting on Twitter that, hey, I drink Gatorade?
Yeah, no, I definitely think you're right on that. EA Sports College Football 25 is probably one of the more exciting things to hit the college sports space in recent memory, and I say that because it seems to really be a unifying thing right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, no, I definitely think that there's some interest there. I think the other thing, too, that Nick Saban brought up today that he's spot on about is that so many people care about college sports, right? Like, I do this for a living and I love my job. Other people, I mean, are rabid fans and want to know every little piece of recruiting news and who's going to be out for a game, things like that. And that's awesome. The NCAA can't screw this up. And if they do screw it up even more than they already have, I think we're really going to be looking at a situation where, will college football teams be separate of universities, and then just fans will cheer on their university's team, but maybe the athletes aren't actually students. Things could get really wacky here really quickly, and I don't think the general fan maybe realizes it. But if you're a fan of South Carolina or Clemson, I would really start to tune in and try to figure out what's going to happen here.
You can read his stuff at on3.com. He is Pete Nakos. Pete, thanks so much for taking the time today, man.
Thanks so much. Have a great day, guys.
It is a really interesting time to be a fan of college sports. That is undeniably true. I do keep coming back to this idea that we keep going to Congress to come up with something. And I wonder how that makes you, the average fan, feel. Does it make you feel hopeful that something is going to get accomplished, or does it feel like this cow is out of the barn and we are doing everything we can just to make sure the farmer sees that we are busy? We'll get into that coming up in just a moment. Plus, Tyler Head will join me as well with the text of the hour. 803-404-6100 is the number if you want to get involved with the show. I'm Demetri Ravanos. This is the Halftime Show on 107.5 The Game and the Game Network.
Welcome back in. It is the halftime show.
Well. Look who drug his ass to work.
I finally made it. I was over at the football or indoor practice facility for Pro Day. I was originally supposed to leave at 11:30. That didn't happen. We were talking to Dow Loggin. So I did have to stay to the end. Made my way over here. As I mentioned to you a moment ago, my parking spot was taken. So I had to park all the way up on the roof, which you never like. It takes so long to climb to the top of a parking deck because you're going all of 5 miles an hour. So that added several more minutes to my commute over here. Then, of course, I had here, I'm like, oh, now I got to go to the bathroom. That's going to even more time. So I finally made it just in time for the Firehouse Subs text of the hour. I heard you at the beginning of the show talking about Dawn Staley and what's next for her and all that kind of stuff. Robert weighs in and says, I really hope that this university does whatever it can to keep her as our women's head coach for as long as possible. I think they will. The only thing, does she have aspirations to maybe go to a WNBA, to break into the NBA herself, or go coach a men's team, for crying out loud?
Listen, I think that I do not have any doubt the university will do all it can. I mean, think about the way that the university was ready to act when there was just the inkling that she may want to go back to her alma mater at Virginia. What was that, about 5 years ago now? And it didn't take long for Dawn to say, no, I'm not interested. My coach is gone. I don't have any connections there anymore. This is my home. And that's awesome. But if you're Dawn Staley at some point, like I said, maybe what she's chasing is the Gino Auriemma Pat Summitt national championship numbers, and that'd be really advantageous for Carolina. But maybe there's a challenge that cannot be filled in women's college basketball that we have to accept.
And the thing about Dawn Staley is she's a very reserved person. She'll talk to the media when she needs to, but she doesn't go out of her way to really bring you into her life. So we really don't fully understand what her ultimate aspirations are, what her goals are within her career. So she could have a dream of, hey, maybe one day I want to go coach in the WNBA, and if that is her dream, you're probably not going to be able to stop her unless you just back up the Brinks truck.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I mentioned this earlier in the hour. If you do not pay attention to the WNBA, you probably are not aware that the league seems to be invested in making this a New York, LA, and Las Vegas kind of thing. Does she see the opportunity to reunite with Aaliyah Boston in Indiana and be that, cog in the kink in the machine? That can change things? I don't know. Like I just, like all of you, hope she stays forever and ever, because I think it is great for this university to be considered brand number one in something. And without her doing that in women's basketball, I think South Carolina is pretty far away from that in anything else.
Yeah, it's definitely something special. And there are plenty of schools out there that have good women's basketball programs, but very, very few can legitimately say that they are the most universally known, I'd say respected program out of all the other sports within the school.
Yeah, yesterday, the NFL, the movement seemed to be all about quarterbacks. Today, it's been a busy day for running backs. I mean, we saw Saquon Barkley sign yesterday in Philadelphia. We saw Josh Jacobs sign yesterday in Green Bay. Today, we've got Derrick Henry going to Baltimore. We've got Joe Mixon being traded from Cincinnati to Houston. Man, there is some real movement. I thought we would see the salary cap go up, and that meant we were going to see a bunch of dudes re-signing. That has not been the case.
No, it's definitely been a lot to keep up with. You get notifications every 5 minutes, it seems like, from Adam Schefter. But, yeah, a lot of movement, and Saquon Barkley, going to the Eagles, obviously a divisional rival, and getting a decent bag for that. I mean, obviously we don't pay running backs like they want to be paid, but for what the running back market is, that's pretty good sum of money for a guy that has had an injury history in the NFL.
For sure, and we'll get into this a little bit more in the next hour, because the Carolina Panthers came under fire for the amount of money they gave Robert Hunt, saying, look, you just obviously you invest in the offensive line, but guard is not where you guarantee a dude $63 million. I had the same, admittedly, I had the same reaction to Saquon Barkley. I thought it was a ridiculous amount of money to be guaranteeing a running back that now twice has missed significant chunks of seasons with injuries.
Well, and so many teams go to the back by committee approach anywhere. It's like, okay, you're our feature back, but you're only getting 60% of the carries. We're splitting up between 3 guys, and that's kind of the way the league has gone for a while now, because they realize, well, I mean, yeah, you have special running backs, but for the most part, they're kind of a dime a dozen, and I'd much rather have 3 guys that are all capable of carrying the same workload than just overload one guy over and over and over and over and over again. And certainly if that guy goes down with injury, then what are you going to do? I mean, Tennessee's been running that risk with Derrick Henry for all these years. Unfortunately, he's been able to stay healthy for the most part. But that's just a model that isn't, something that is as prevalent in the NFL today as it once was.
I wonder if there is some advantage to giving a high contract value to the guy that is going to be your leader of that running back by committee, because look at what Carolina is going through right now, or what they went through last season. They gave Miles Sanders a lot of money. Sanders obviously was more hurt than he led on to begin the year, and so it ends up Chuba Hubbard is your leading running back. If the Panthers suddenly need to create cap space, like, they've got a prime candidate to cut. And look, I'm sorry, Carolina Gamecock fans. I think, oh my God, the running back's name just went out of my head. For the Panthers, played at Carolina, Red Thor. Oh no, you're killing me.
Oh, you're.
Anyway, like, I think they have some big bets that they made that didn't pan out. That, look, if they want to create cap space, they can. So maybe there is some advantage in that way. But I don't know. Look, admittedly, I'm not a capologist, right? But with the cap going up, I think everybody can take some risks that maybe they didn't feel like they could at guard, at running back, even this time last month.
Right. Absolutely. 1 hour in the books, 2 more hours to go. Tyler and Dimitri here on the afternoon show. We'll dive into more NFL and what's going on with free agents as of today. Coming up next here on the halftime show. Hayden Hurst, that's right. You said I thought you said running back. That's why I was confused. That's tight end. I was like, what are you talking about?
If I said running back, that was
you said running back. Yes, Hayden Hurst, former Gamecock. Hour number 2 coming up next.
Hour number 2, welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head and Dimitri Ravanos along with you. I said that right, correct?
You got it.
Okay. Terry always mispronounces
Wait,
it.
Dave, you're going to fade it out before the scream? You just leave it under us.
Tyler likes to get right into it.
Too late now. It's gone. Regardless, quick note before we jump into football. Of course, Lamont Paris won SEC Coach of the Year just the other day, was just recently named earlier on this morning AP SEC Coach of the Year as well. Continue to rack up the accolades, and we're still waiting to see if he's going to take home National Coach of the Year here very soon as well, which would be certainly well-deserved for everything that he's done here with South Carolina. But it is football, and more football in the 1 o'clock hour. And the Brian Burns deal with the Panthers is an interesting one for sure. It's garnered so much attention. Do you know that country music superstar Luke Combs weighed in on this?
I saw this yesterday. Luke Combs, it's a very weird, very good old boy element of celebrity Carolina Panthers fans, because you know who else had a problem with it yesterday was Dale Jr.
Yes.
Which
he's not even a Panthers fan. He's a Washington fan.
But he is still, like, this whole time has been a Panthers ticket holder because he lives in Charlotte. And look, that's the case with most Panthers ticket holders. They're actually fans of someone else.
Luke Combs says, and I quote, "At Panthers, what are we doing?" All caps. No first-round pick for McCaffrey a few years back, and now none for Burns. Are we just firebombing the whole team here or what? I usually don't comment on these kind of things, but it's just become a slow torture at this point. You know, what your podcast name is, This Team is Killing Us?
Yeah.
I think that's pretty apropos.
Yeah, the Panthers, for people that had not heard the official compensation, it is a 2 and a 5 from the New York Giants in order to get Brian Burns. It ends up being pick number 39 and I believe 141. So both picks in this year's draft. I got to tell you, Tyler, I don't have a huge problem with it. Yes, it's less than I thought Burns would generate, but I think you've got to give Dan Morgan the benefit of the doubt a little bit. He was just hired as GM at the beginning of the year, and he has to unscrew so much that Scott Fitterer screwed up.
Well, and the thing about, Luke Combs brings up Christian McCaffrey. That was a viable piece of your team that was highly sought after by a lot of other teams.
There's a reason that Combs brings up these two guys. At the time they are traded, each one was the best player on the team.
Sure.
Like, his criticism is not unfair. How do you not get a number 1 overall pick? But I do think it's important to point out that it's not like Dan Morgan turned down a number 1 pick to take a 2 and a 5.
Sure.
What the Rams offered 2 years ago was not on the table anymore.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of one of those things like, we're going to take the best offer that we can get. If we can get a 2 and a 5 for him, okay, we'll take it, because it's probably not going to get any better than that.
Yeah, and remember that the Rams made the offer before last year's draft, before last season, and the offer would have been 2 number 1 picks, 1 in this year's draft and 1 in next year's draft. So you could say, well, it would be the number 19 pick, but would it? I mean, maybe Brian Burns would have changed things, and it's not significantly different from number 39.
Yeah, and here's the thing about the Panthers. It takes more than one player to make this team great.
Yeah.
And if they feel like getting rid of what you said was their best player to potentially get some more guys that can maybe not necessarily fill the same void, but bring you a better overall level of skill on the defense or the offense as well, then that hopefully benefits you in the long run.
Like I said, I don't have a problem with the compensation. Mina Kimes was on ESPN yesterday, though, and she made it pretty clear she thought that the New York Giants got a steal from the Carolina Panthers here. Mina.
Really, they didn't give up too much to get him when you consider the fact that Carolina reportedly turned down multiple firsts not that long ago from the Rams, which looks very bad for Carolina, by the way. This, to me, is decent value for an edge rusher who's not only in the prime of his career, but still ranks amongst the NFL's best. Production wasn't quite what it has been last year, just 8 sacks, but over the course of his career in Carolina since 2019, 11th in pressures league-wide, 12th in sacks. One of the more bendy, flexible rushers in the league. Reminds me kind of like of young Von Miller in that way. So good at getting the quarterback, such a great set of moves, and a really nice complementary skill set for a Giants defense that I expect to be better next season.
So what Mina brings up there is the reason that before the cap rose the way it did, I kind of was hoping the Panthers would not franchise tag Brian Burns, which is that he absolutely is one of the best pass rushers in the league right now, very productive, but to what end for this team? There is so much that you have to build up, replace, improve on to even be a competitor in a bad division, that overpaying for Brian Burns just didn't make sense to me. If this was the best offer, this was the right move for the team.
Yeah, and again, it's really tough to talk about it now when you don't know what those picks are going to end up resulting in. It's one of those things that hindsight can be 2020, saying, hey, at the time I thought it was a really bad deal, but we ended up getting X player and X player, and they ended up being fantastic. So you don't really know the full scope of it until you see how it eventually plays out.
Panthers fans also, and this goes back, decades. Panthers fans, because Charlotte is the kind of market it is and the fans are the kind of people they are, get really bought into their dudes, right? Like Steve Smith is a Hall of Fame wide receiver. I'm not taking anything away from him. But the way lifelong Panthers fans talk about Steve Smith, you would think he's Randy Moss.
Right.
And that just wasn't the case. So I think there are some personal hurt feelings, maybe broken hearts is probably a better way to say it.
Sure.
And I totally get that. But this team has not won a Super Bowl. This team has no dynasty in them, at least as currently constructed. So everything should be on the table right now. And you last year sold the farm for a new franchise quarterback who needs a lot of help, not just because of his size, but legitimately needs a lot of help because he does not have receivers that can get open.
Right.
You've got to amass picks, especially when you don't have a number one.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things you just have to ask the question, can it really get any worse? Because I don't think it can.
Yeah.
So why not?
So you've got two number twos now, both of them in that 33 to 40 range, number 33 and number 39. I don't think they're going to end up taking both of these picks. I think that at least one of these is going to get moved. Is that for T. Higgins? Is that for another offensive line piece? I don't know. You know, very similar to, do you remember when the Raiders traded Khalil Mack to the Bears, right?
Yep.
And they got 2 first-round picks for them. And I remember the day that it happened, Colin Cowherd saying, okay, which one of these is used to replace Khalil Mack? That's the downside now, right? You get compensation back, and you got to figure out where you're going to go find a pass rusher now.
Yeah, and again, the unfortunate part is you don't have a lot of parts and pieces to move around with the Panthers. So the fact that you do have your best player that, you know, is going to offer you some kind of value when it comes to trades, you do have to part ways with him. And again, it's tough to say right now because we don't know who those players that are going to end up occupying those spots they got from the Giants are, but something you're going to have to wait and see, and hopefully it works out.
And what do they want to do exactly? They could stand to get a little bit better in the passing game, both on offense and defense, because remember, they're losing Jeremy Chin, who, after a very optimistic, successful rookie season, never really seemed to take that next step. Maybe you want to upgrade at corner because J.C. Horn cannot stay on the field. Obviously, you know you need receiving help. You know you need offensive line help. You probably could stand to make a change at tight end as well. This move is not just about amassing draft picks. It's also about getting contracts that do not make sense off the books. And this was a big one that creates a lot of cap space for the Panthers.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, what was the new general manager's name? Forgive me.
Oh, Dan Morgan.
Dan Morgan, obviously very early on in his tenure here. So trying to kind of wrangle in the mess that he ended up taking over. And again, this is one of his earlier moves, but we'll see how it plays out in the long run.
I think Morgan did a really good job because obviously Panthers fans remember him as a member of that team that lost to the Patriots in the Super Bowl. College football fans can easily picture him playing for the U, right? I think one of the smart things that he did in his introductory press conference was explain his bona fides when it comes to scouting talent and understanding a roster. And I think that helped me, that helped sell me on the idea that big changes are going to need to be made, and this is not a dude that just, you know, as the New Day said about Vince McMahon, wants meaty men slapping meat, right? Like, he really has an idea about what needs to be done, where this franchise or where this roster, I guess, has to go in order to take another step. Because as you and I talked about yesterday, it's there for the taking. If Kirk Cousins is the best quarterback in your division, there's no reason the Panthers should be this far out of the conversation.
Well, the question becomes then, how long until David Tepper starts meddling or gets fed up with him not being a yes man and decides to fire him?
I think it's different, right? Like, I think it's easy to demand someone be a yes man, to demand your GM be a yes man if they look like Scott Fitterer.
Sure.
I think there is a certain element of intimidation that comes with a dude like Dan Morgan, and the fact that Morgan spent a year kind of building up the Tepper relationship relationship before he got this job. I think he's going to get some time here.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah. For sure. I mean, look, there's a lot that has to happen, right? I saw Dan Orlovsky talking about this on ESPN yesterday afternoon, that we might even still be a year away, like meaning after the 2024 season. That might have to go by before we can even figure out, is Bryce Young an NFL quarterback, because he is so lacking for help on that side of the ball in Carolina right now.
Right, absolutely.
All right, listen, part of what they need to do is rebuild that offensive line. They caught a lot of heat yesterday for the contract they gave Robert Hunt, but when your quarterback is Bryce Young, can you ever invest too much in the offensive line? We will ask Mike Golick Jr. that question. He is going to join us next here on the Halftime Show. That's Tyler Head. I'm Demetri Ravanis. You are listening to 107.5 The Game and The Game Network. Tyler Head and Dimitri Ravanos with you on the halftime show. We're going to bring Mike Golick Jr. on here in just a second, but something just dawned on me, Tyler, and Mike maybe can help me out with this. We were talking about Luke Combs' reaction to the Panthers roster moves yesterday, and it dawned on me in the break.
Okay.
I don't know who Luke Combs is.
You don't know who Luke Combs is?
I don't. I mean, I know he's a country singer, but...
You've never heard Long Neck Ice Cold Beer Never Broke My Heart? When it rains, it pours?
No.
The thing he did with Fast Car and Tracy Chapman recently?
Oh, that was him?
That was him,
Okay.
yes.
All right, then I guess I have heard of Luke Combs. Am I alone in this, Mike Golick Jr.? You are very connected to pop culture. Should I know Luke Combs?
I don't know. I mean, this is probably a larger commentary on like the current state of country music and people kind of deviating away from that. But I would say Luke Combs is probably one of the ones you should know. I have a very concrete memory of Luke Combs. He played at the Super Bowl 2 years ago when it was in Phoenix, and I was there with a couple of friends from Sirius XM. And all of a sudden, over my shoulder comes former Notre Dame and New York Giants great defensive lineman Justin Tuck, wailing every word of Luke Combs down in the pit there, because he's a country guy. He's from Alabama, so he's like, you don't know anything about this. He's like, you're from Connecticut. This is my stuff. So, if you are able to incite Luke Combs to come out and start criticizing the front office's moves, you have really strayed from the light of God if you were the Carolina Panthers.
We are talking to Mike Golick Jr., host of Gojo and Golick on the DraftKings Network. Mike, thanks so much for taking the time today. Obviously, Luke and Panthers fans are not happy. I tend to fall back on there is so much that needs to be done for this team to be competitive that I don't know what sense it made to keep Brian Burns.
No, I think it's more a frustration with the fan base, because the franchise has been so listless. Like, we talked to Charles Davis on the show today, and as he pointed out, this is what happens when you've got multiple regimes that a player's been passed through and over. Like Brian Burns, yes, was a cornerstone piece of a prior regime, of a group of people making decisions who are no longer in power there. And so now it's everyone trying to make the best of what's around. But I think the frustration is there doesn't appear to be any foresight. There hasn't appeared to have been a plan in the David Tepper era in Carolina. There's just been a lot of reactionary decisions followed by trying to cover up those reactionary decisions and mistakes with more decisions. And it leads you to the point where you have to operate as a franchise much less efficiently and don't end up maximizing the assets in the building and the players whose names people actually do know who pay money to watch the team. So I think it's a larger frustration about the state of the franchise that really is just, Brian Burns is a proxy for the mismanagement that's gone on everywhere else.
And Mike, we live in such an instant gratification society where people see this and immediately think about what you're losing with Brian Burns going to the Giants. But, you are getting the second and fifth round pick from the Giants, and you don't know what that's going to turn into. And those guys, whoever they end up being, could end up maybe not being singularly as good as him leaving this team, but down the road could end up benefiting the team more depending on whatever else happens around them. So it's very hard to judge the true impact on a trade like this until you actually see who comes in and how they contribute.
Yeah, but it's value lost. I mean, the fact that you had a team that was willing to give you 2 firsts for the same guy you just got a second and a 5 for feels pretty hollow. And talking about instant gratification, that's what you got to talk to the owner about. I mean, David Tepper has been the ultimate instant gratification player when it comes to this franchise operating like a team that plays in Madden. So I think, again, it goes back to that where if you're the fan base, what confidence do you have in this front office to be able to go out and make those picks into anything at this point that's going to turn your team into what you want, which is a contender the way that you used to have years ago? I just think right now there's not a lot of reason to have faith or confidence in the franchise, and so it is on them to maximize these picks, to go and continue what they do this offseason really is, hey, your number one job for Dave Canales and everyone else is to revitalize Bryce Young. You spent the number 1 pick on him. You moved heaven and hell to go and get that number 1 pick, and now they've added some muscle up front. They're doing the right things by their young quarterback who's got some size limitations that they're trying to account for. But it's on the front office, and really it's on the owner to go out here and prove to the people that pay their money to watch this team that he's the one capable of leading them back to where they want to go.
We're talking to Mike Golick Jr. from Gojo and Golick on the DraftKings Network. I'm sure it warmed your heart to see a guard getting so much guaranteed money yesterday for the Carolina Panthers. Robert Hunt is one of the guys that I really wanted this team to land in free agency. Might be a little bit more expensive than I was anticipating, but when Bryce Young is your quarterback, can you spend too much on the offensive line?
No, you're in for a penny, in for a pound at this point, right? And this was the biggest miscalculation I made about the Panthers last year was, oh, they had invested some capital in their offensive line. Oh, they had young draft picks on there. Hey, at the end of the 2022 season, they had come together and had been running the ball pretty well, and you had a group you felt like you could grow around. But between miscalculating that and that group certainly not being as up to the task of protecting their quarterback, between the lack of weapons that showed up, especially in a post-DJ Moore world, they had a lot of work to do. And so were you going to have to probably overpay a little bit? Sure. But you're in an offseason that saw a bump in the salary cap that everyone's getting to play a little bit with. And we're seeing in the league right now, overall, a premium paid on quality beef. And I think that's especially relevant when your quarterback is built the way that Bryce Young's built.
So what do you do, and we'll wrap up here because I think the biggest consternation for Panthers fans last year when the offense would take the field is there would be games where it seemed like Ike Ekwonu did not know what his job was. So what would your approach be to coaching him through this season as you try and build him back to what we saw towards the end of his rookie year more than what we saw in year two?
Simplify and focus on technique are usually good places to go back to with offensive linemen. I mean, Ickey Sell coming out of college, and I got a chance to cover him at NC State a bunch. The guy's a physical marvel. There aren't a lot of things that big that move as well as Ickey does, but there were always certain things about his game technically that you knew were going to need a little bit of polish, and coming into now another system is certainly going to stress that. But I think overall for the Panthers offense, the idea is, hey, add some compelling weapons on the outside, but also simplify the equation and where Dave comes from and the job that he was able to do with an offensive line last year that a lot of people didn't expect a lot out of in Tampa Bay that was replacing a bunch of key pieces from the Super Bowl team down there, I think is a good reminder that, all right, much like the quarterback situation where you're bringing him in part because of work he's done with Geno Smith, with Baker Mayfield, I think the same can be said for the offensive line where reclaiming some of that by allowing them to be big, go downhill, and wear on people is usually a good place to start when you've got guys that physically capable.
Before he got drafted, we heard that maybe Ickey in the NFL was more of a guard than a tackle after 1 year of struggle. Is it too early to start thinking about that?
Probably, just because athletically he's so gifted. You want to give guys like that every chance to exist on the outside as best you can. But, you know, what I also think they're different skill sets. I was never sure if it would be a seamless transition down to guard because it's difficult. It's operating in space versus operating in a phone booth on the interior. Guys getting on you quicker, different body types you got to battle with. And so I'd probably make every effort, especially given where you drafted him, to try and make it work out there. But if it becomes that clear, then, yeah, listen, you got to make whatever you can out of this situation and see what the player's capable of.
You can see him and hear him every morning on the DraftKings Network. Gojo and Golick is the show. He is Mike Golick Jr. Mike, always a pleasure, buddy. We'll catch up again soon.
Thanks, fellas. Have a good one.
The Panthers obviously have a lot of work to do, and Mike is not wrong that I think no matter what it is that needs to be done on the offensive line, all of us kind of want to know, okay, well, what's happening on the outside? What's happening with the weapons that Bryce Young has to throw to or even hand the ball off to? A move was made yesterday that I think tells you the Carolina Panthers are very much in the thick of things to bring in the most prized weapon available in the NFL this offseason. I'll tell you who that is and why the Panthers are in good position coming up in just a moment. That is Tyler Head. I'm Dimitri Ravanos. This is the Halftime Show. You're listening to 107.5 The Game and The Game Network.
Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler and Dimitri along with you on this Tuesday afternoon. Real quick, I want to remind you about the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. Your chance to win money anytime a Gamecock hitter blasts a Grand Slam this season. Still waiting on the first one, but make sure you go online to 1075thegame.com and register for your chance to win each and every week. So when that Grand Slam does happen, you can be the lucky recipient of however much money is in the pot at that point in time, as $25 goes in each and every game. Speaking of baseball, our guy Josh has been bothering me all morning because I keep forgetting to do it. We have 2 pairs of tickets. So callers number 4 and 5 right now for next Saturday. Not this Saturday. They're on the road at Ole Miss this Saturday. Next Saturday, Vandy coming to town. 2 pairs of tickets for callers number 4 and 5 for next Saturday's game, baseball against Vanderbilt, right here in Columbia at Founders Park. Captain Dave anxiously waiting by to take your phone call. Continue on our conversation about the Panthers, some potential help coming to the outside for Bryce Young.
Yeah, I think so. I know that when free agency first opened up, everybody that is a Panthers fan that was hoping that a real weapon would be coming to join Bryce Young sort of lost a lot of faith, right? T. Higgins very quickly gets tagged by Cincinnati. Mike Evans very quickly gets re-signed by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And yesterday, as free agency was officially open, I mean, Tyler, we weren't even a minute into free agency, and we're announcing that Michael Pittman Jr. has re-signed with the Colts. So all kind of seems lost.
Well, there's no way they could have worked out those deals. The tampering period didn't start until noon yesterday. Are you telling me that they would have undermined the rules?
Shockingly, Tyler, these deals get done around NFL rules. But then we hear that the Cincinnati Bengals have received a trade request from T. Higgins. Higgins sort of went on the record, said he loves Cincinnati. He wishes he could finish his career there, but if the team is not interested in talking about a long-term deal, he would like to move on. And immediately, 2 names kind of rise to the top based on what the estimated value is, which is a late 1 or a high 2.
Right.
We hear a lot of Kansas City. We hear a lot of New England. And then later on in the day, we start to hear Carolina as a possibility. Those would be picks 32, 33, and 35. Kansas City, Carolina, New England. The reason I think that the Panthers make a ton of sense here is if you are Cincinnati, obviously you are making a lot of roster moves. You've got Joe Burrow coming back. You are a contender with one of the best quarterbacks and one of the best receivers in the NFL right now. Are you really going to allow Kansas City to get better?
Probably not.
Probably not, especially if you're not getting back a prime draft pick, right?
Sure.
Then it comes down to, is 33 better than 35? And I think it is. I think if you are Cincinnati, sending T. Higgins to Carolina represents the very best possibility because you get a pick which is just as good as 32. I think that is hard to argue that there's a big difference between 33 and 32. And you get him to a team that does not threaten you at all.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to look at it because, again, it's going to take more than one player to be able to rebuild this Panthers team. And you're also talking about a team that's in a completely different division, AFC to NFC. So that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think that, the other thing to think about here from the Panthers' point of view is now that you've got the Brian Burns deal done, and look, you can complain all you want about a 2 and a 5 as opposed to even a single 1, you are in a position now where you have 2 second-round picks. Those are valuable. You should be finding starters with second-round picks.
And that second-round pick from the Giants, that'd be number 39 overall, I believe. So you're not really losing that much at 6 different spots, and then you'd be gaining, theoretically, T. Higgins is as valuable as a first-round pick that you do not have this year.
Absolutely, and he's what, 25, right?
Yeah, still young. Still got plenty of tread on the tire.
There is so much in front of that guy. From the moment the deal got done for Brian Burns and you found out they have 2 number 2 picks, I thought all along one of those is getting moved.
Sure.
And even before free agency began, I thought there was a good chance that 33 would get moved anyway if you could get an established guard or center. They go out and get that in free agency. Absolutely, they overpay for Robert Hunt. There is no way around the amount of guaranteed money they gave the guy is too much to give a guard. But if you're Carolina, you've got to do whatever you can to convince people it is worth coming to spend prime years of your career with a team that just won 2 games last season.
Well, and that's the thing is, you look at a guy like Bryce Young, who a lot of people certainly look at and said, oh, he's a bust. But again, taking a deeper dive into it, he hasn't had the pieces around him to be successful. So you can look at a guy like T. Higgins and say, hey, you're going to be able to be matched up with this young, promising quarterback. We're going to put the pieces around him with an offensive line and all that kind of stuff. And you're going to be part of this rise of bringing the Panthers back to prominence. And again, as long as the price is good enough, then that's enticing for a guy like T. Higgins, I feel like.
No, I agree. And I think if you look at who is available now on the free agent market, I mean, what are you going to do exactly? Is a broken down OBJ your best option? Is Calvin Ridley your best option? Is bringing Curtis Samuel back? Like, I don't see somebody that makes the receiving core appreciably better than it was last year.
To me, you have to compare all those guys to Adam Thielen. Because, again, he was theoretically your number one this past season, well past his prime, obviously dealt with a lot of injuries. You mentioned Odell Beckham Jr. has had his litany of injuries and just been around the game for a while now. I don't think he's that much of a sizable improvement over what you had a year ago, as opposed to a guy like T. Higgins, very young, again, still a lot of tread on the tire, as I mentioned a moment ago, that can theoretically take you a whole lot farther than whatever guy that's been around forever can.
Yeah, I think Ridley, I think Hollywood Brown out of Arizona, I think those are 2 guys that certainly would make the receiving core better. I don't know that either of them are as good as Higgins, but have you heard about the deal with Ridley in Jacksonville?
A little bit.
So it's a conditional pick that they gave up in order to get him from Atlanta, and if they sign him, if they sign him, re-sign him before the league year begins, it becomes a 2nd-round pick.
Okay.
All right. If Jacksonville waits till tomorrow to re-sign Calvin Ridley, it's a 3rd-round pick. There's a reason there's not a deal done yet between Jacksonville and Calvin Ridley. Now, that being said, maybe there are other offers out there.
Sure.
But if you're Carolina, I'm not rushing to get involved with that if you think that, this is playing the numbers and there's a deal done already.
Yeah, I would think so. And again, I feel like T. Higgins has a little more upside compared to Calvin Ridley. Now, again, Calvin Ridley is certainly capable wide receiver when he's not getting himself in trouble off of the field, of course, and was certainly serviceable in his time with Atlanta before getting suspended. But yeah, if you can get the T. Higgins thing to happen, certainly go for that.
I want you to take a listen to Stephen A. Smith on First Take yesterday when asked about T. Higgins and would he or should he accept being traded to the Carolina Panthers.
If I'm a T. Higgins, I'm 25 years of age, I can't depart from a Joe Burrow to a Derek Carr in New Orleans, a Justin Fields or Caleb Williams in Chicago, Bryce Young in Carolina. I can't do that. I got to sit up there and I got to look at a Justin Herbert. I got to look at a Patrick Mahomes, okay? Even though Russell Wilson isn't on that level with Pickens and what he brings to the table, with questions as to whether or not they're going to keep Deontay Johnson, I think that's something that you could potentially explore.
I mean, I hear what Stephen A. Smith is saying. I don't think anybody that is at that level wants to go to the worst team in the league, but Stephen A. Smith is talking about NFL like it is the NBA in terms of players having agency.
Yeah, and look, if for the right price, anybody will go to any team at any time. So again, if you make it worth their while for the money and can at least give them that hope and promise that they're going to be a part of building the team into something that's going to be competitive in the next couple of years, that's enticing for somebody to go to a team like the Panthers, even though they've been bottom dwellers for several years now.
The team has $24 million worth of cap space. That is significantly more than before the the Brian Burns deal was done. Getting Robert Hunt is a big move along the offensive line. They probably have enough to make another significant move beyond just having to sign the rookies that they have to sign. If you use that because if you're trading for T. Higgins, you're not just trading for him. You got to trade for him and extend him.
Right.
So if that's what you use that money to do, I don't know why any Panthers fan would consider that a bad move.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. And again, you can't really get much worse at this point in time, so why not swing for the fences?
Right, and look, there is a long history in the NFL of guys that benefit from playing opposite one of the 2 or 3 best receivers in the league, then going to become the alpha somewhere else and it just not working out the same, right?
Sure.
So that is a risk you run, but yeah, how much worse can it get? And also, if you're Carolina and you are this invested in your second-year quarterback, you know you've got to do something different next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, he just didn't have the viable pieces around him. I mean, you know what? Bryce Young may end up being a bust. He may end up being the worst quarterback in NFL history. We just have not given him the proper opportunity with the pieces around him and the protection around him. You know, talking about Robert Hunt being brought in on the offensive line to give him the chance to show us what he's really made of.
What I think is interesting so far is the way that Dave Canales has been talking about Bryce Young since he became the Panthers head coach. And I don't want to give anybody the mistaken impression that I think Bryce is the problem, but I do wonder how much of the performative, over-the-top, this isn't Bryce's fault. How long can that go on, really, before Dave Canales kind of has to start talking about, look, if you're going to lead an NFL franchise, there are certain responsibilities or certain I don't know what the right word for it is, burdens, I guess you have to take on as yours.
I think you get at least the 1-year grace period as a rookie, especially when you're a guy that was the top overall pick going to the worst team in the league.
Yeah.
That it's like, okay, well, he just didn't have everything that he needed. But when you get into year number 2, if you're not seeing those improvements, and again, that does go back to the organization a little bit, giving him some pieces around him. If you're not seeing those improvements and steps in the right direction, then towards the end of year number 2, you're saying, okay, now it's a little bit more on your back to start making a difference here.
Yeah, look, as a Bama alum myself, obviously I love Bryce Young and will root for his success. Even I don't believe that his ceiling is top 5, top 10 quarterback in the NFL. I think he's capable of being a viable, successful NFL starting quarterback,
right,
if the pieces are right.
Right.
And that is the big thing that Carolina is trying to dig its way out of right now. Let's talk about the other Carolina. Let's talk about the Gamecocks, because Bleacher Report published an article yesterday that is absolute peak talking season nonsense. We will get into that coming up in just a moment. He is Tyler Head. I'm Demetri Ravanis. You are inside the halftime show on 107.5 The Game and The Game Network.
Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler and Dimitri wrapping up hour number 2. A lot going on the game coming up later on today at 6 o'clock. Going to have Carolina Calls with Coach Staley, recapping everything that happened this past weekend, maybe get her reaction to what Kim Mulkey had to say after the game on Sunday as well. Start looking ahead to next week's NCAA tournament where South Carolina will once again be a number 1 seed. That is at 6 o'clock tonight, taking you immediately in to first pitch of baseball, taking on Georgia State tonight at 7 o'clock. Going to have pregame on our sister station, ESPN 1320 WISW at 6:45. But again, you can listen to Carolina Calls from 6 until 7, taking you right up to first pitch between the Gamecocks and the Panthers out in Augusta, coming up at 7 o'clock tonight as well. It is
Whoops, the Sean Elliott Classic.
That's right. I did see Sean Elliott today out there at Pro Day. He was not screaming at anybody or headbutting anyone, so a little bit more of a calm day for him. But yes, a little bit of the Sean Elliott Classic there, which here's the thing about Sean Elliott. Before we get into our Firehouse Subs text of the hour, like, I don't know how he balanced being a head coach in Atlanta and basically living here in Columbia where most of his family was. He had to have put so many miles on that car.
Well, if you ask Georgia State fans, he balanced it by not recruiting kids playing football in Atlanta.
Well, there was a contingent of the fan base that was ready to boot him out a year or two ago when they missed a bowl game. But he made 5 in 7 years. Like for a group of 5 program in the Sun Belt, that's not terrible.
I was about to say for one that didn't exist a decade ago.
Right. Yeah. No, I remember when they started, played their first game against Shorter College and sold out the lower bowl of the Georgia Dome.
You will probably get this trivia question. Who was their first head coach at Georgia State?
Oh, gosh. Dang it.
That would be SEC legend Bill Curry.
That's right. I think I'm thinking of Kennesaw State. Vince Dooley helped start the Kennesaw State program. I'm forgetting who was involved with helping start the Georgia State program, but I remember when they came along and it was a big deal, and then they just kind of became another group of 5 school that exist in the shadows of Georgia Tech, who exists in the shadows of Georgia.
I mean, it's one of those things that there are a lot of these around the country where you look at the city they're in and the high school football space they occupy and think, that should be your next Boise State at some point.
You would think. And look, I even had prospects of potentially going to Georgia State myself coming out of high school based on the broadcasting stuff that they were offering at that point in time. But I can't say I love the campus. I don't like downtown city type of campuses like that. South Carolina's a little bit different because it's kind of on the edge of town. Like Georgia State is literally in the middle of downtown Atlanta, and it's not safe to walk through certain areas of that campus at night. But it's an interesting place.
All right, let's get to our text of the hour.
So going back to the conversation that you had at the beginning of the show, talking about Dawn Staley and kind of what's next for her. Nameless texter weighs in and says, nobody wants to be a women's basketball school. I agree to a point. I think everybody wants their football program to be the most successful thing. That being said, don't take for granted the fact that you have the best women's basketball program in the entire country, because you could be average at everything. It's great to be at least good at one thing or great at one thing and average to decent at everything else than be just average at everything.
I hesitate to say this because sometimes when you are brutally honest, it can be taken as being mean. But what in the history of Carolina football tells you this is capable of being a football powerhouse?
You go back to the 10-win seasons a couple years ago. That was certainly turning in the right direction. They won the SEC East, went to the SEC Championship.
Those 10-win seasons when routinely 5 or 6 teams in the country were better than them. I mean, I'm not telling you I'm not rooting for it. I'm not telling you that they can't get back to that point. Even in an expanded playoff, this school can put together teams that make the playoff. But this school, look, Clemson's run at the top of college football did not last that long.
Sure, absolutely. And I feel like most South Carolina fans kind of understand where they are in the pecking order in the grand scheme of things. And I don't think people get too carried away saying, oh, we're going to suddenly become a national championship contender tomorrow, next year, the year after that, or something like that. Not saying that it can't happen, especially in this crazy world of NIL. If you get the right amount of money, you never know what can be possible of. But I think people kind of understand where they sit in the SEC as of right now.
I think before you got here, got to Columbia, there was a contingent of fans that didn't understand how Georgia and Georgia and Clemson could be doing this and the Gamecocks not keep pace. I think for the most part that sentiment is gone.
Right.
But it was the lunatic fringe was pretty loud for about a year and a half there about what should be here, and just there was no evidence that it could be.
Well, and you look at a program like Georgia, when Mark Richt was the head coach, they averaged 9 to 10 wins a year every single year. They just couldn't quite get over that hump in an SEC championship game or anything like that towards the end of his tenure there at Georgia. So they were always kind of knocking on the door. And, I mean, their worst season in Richt's tenure was 2010, where they went 6-7 and lost the Liberty Bowl to Central Florida. That being said, every other season was either 8, 9, or 10 wins or something in that realm. And Clemson's rise with Dabo Swinney was very much the same way, that, yes, struggled out of the gate a little bit, but once they started rolling, they were winning 9, 10 wins a year, BCS bowls, New Year's Six bowls, college football playoffs. They were always kind of in that echelon of being right there.
Speaking of South Carolina, Morgan Moriarty, who writes for Bleacher Report, put out a column yesterday predicting upsets for the 2024 season, and South Carolina over LSU is one of her picks. And I got to tell you, Tyler, this struck me as peak talking season because her reasons were the following.
Okay.
Both teams have new quarterbacks. The game is at Williams-Brice. The end.
Yeah, and it's assumed that Garrett Nussmeier is going to be the quarterback there at LSU, which people forget. Let's go back to the end of the 2022 season when Jaden Daniels got hurt in the SEC championship game, and Nussmeier came in and was slinging it all over the yard against that Georgia defense. People thought, man, this guy should be the starter in 23. Yeah. Jaden Daniels obviously goes on to win the freaking Heisman Trophy, for crying out loud. But, people think very highly of Garrett Nussmeier, but we'll see what he does when asked to step into that starting role.
So that's the thing, right? That's the drop-off. Is not the talent, it's what the playbook is going to be without Jaden Daniels, or maybe it's not even going to be the playbook. It's when the play is not there, what LSU is capable of doing without a dynamic presence like Jaden Daniels. We talked about this yesterday, man. Carolina's schedule is a brutal one, particularly in October. I hold out hope that they are going to pull an upset or two this season. I think they are capable of doing it if Lenore Sellers lives up to what it is we have heard he is capable of being. I think it is insane to try and pick those upsets right now because we have a whole other transfer period to go to.
Well, that's the thing, is South Carolina's roster's changed so much in just the one transfer portal time period over the winter that we really don't know what it's going to be like until we actually get into the season. So plenty more to talk about. We'll continue to dive into football as we get into the 2 o'clock hour. Recap some of what happened with Pro Day earlier on today and some prospects of Gamecocks going to the NFL. That's coming up. It is the halftime show. He's Dimitri. I'm Tyler here on The Game. Hour number 3, it is the halftime show. Tyler and Dimitri here along with you on this Tuesday. Reminder, as always, you can check us out in multiple ways, not only listening on 107.5 The Game, 100.3 The Game out in Myrtle Beach, 100.5 The Game out in Florence. Also watch us on the Game TV, sponsored by Shepherd's Glass, as Dimitri waves at the camera, and on the 107.5 The Game app. Just give it a download. Take us with you wherever you go, around the state, around the country, around the world. You'll never be without 107.5 The Game. Earlier, the reason I was late for this show, I was out at Pro Day at the indoor facility, which is a beautiful facility, by the way, if you haven't gotten a chance to go inside there. A lot of commotion, a lot of action. I've never been a part of a pro day before, but I think I saw a representative from just about every team in the NFL. Obviously, all the coaches are out there, a lot of family, kind of a chaotic environment, but very cool to experience for the first time.
You know, a few years ago, I was working in North Carolina, and I was at NC State's pro day. I want to say this would have been the year that Jacoby Brissett was coming out in the draft, and it struck me as very interesting. And Spencer Rattler is on a different level in that Brissett was a guy that people said could be drafted, and that's about where they left it, right? Sure. But just like Rattler, he was not a guy that a lot of draft pundits were talking about. You're going to build your future around this guy. And I found, at least at Brissett's pro day, that brought a lot of teams out because they wanted to see what this kid was all about, get to know him, and get to know, would he be able to develop? Would he be able to remain a good locker room presence if he is stuck with that frustrating spot at number 2 or number 3 on the depth chart? I would imagine there are a lot of people that wanted to know that about Spencer Rattler today, too.
Yeah, probably so. And look, Rattler, from an offseason standpoint, even going back to the regular season, there was a lot of narrative around him, maybe, you know, not being somebody that you would even think about drafting, but played well enough this past year. And the fact that he didn't really have an offensive line or a run game around him actually ended up helping him as far as his overall, you know, performance goes, because he was doing a lot of the heavy lifting on the offense, and I think that brought him in the good graces in a lot of people's eyes, and he steadily rose the draft boards as the season went along. Then you go into this offseason, he's the MVP of the Reese's Senior Bowl. He throws at the Combine a couple weeks ago because, you know, obviously Caleb Williams, Drake May, those guys didn't. Showed out a lot there. Put up pretty respectable numbers as far as the other stuff, as far as the individual testing at the Combine win. And from what I was able to see today, looks like his throwing sessions went really good for what we were able to see with his wide receivers. And, you know, I don't think he's going to rise any higher than what people, you know, project his ceiling to be maybe be the late, you know, second round or something like that. But, you know, something where you can go to hopefully a good situation, likely as a backup, and whether that be a backup for the long haul or somebody that maybe you mold for 2 or 3 years and ends up being your starter based on whatever the current situation with your starter is. But I think Spencer Rattler has a high upside potential in the NFL wherever he ends up.
Before I start asking you, like, specifics about this pro day, like, I do think, do you remember the name Carson Strong?
Sounds familiar.
Carson Strong, I believe, came out in the draft 2 years ago out of Nevada, and he was one of these dudes that, like, he was a look-the-part all-star, right?
Of course.
Like, right body frame, moved well, had a big arm, but had a lot of injury concerns. And there was a lot of talk about, hey, it's going to be a risk with this guy. You're probably looking at 5th round, even though he really does have day 2 kind of talent. You're probably looking at 5th round. And that guy ends up going undrafted. I think once you get out of those top-tier guys, you never know where it is a team is going to bite. And that's why for a dude like Spencer Rattler, a pro day becomes so important. Not that the Senior Bowl didn't matter, not that the Combine didn't matter, but this is your chance in your element to get to know these people and for them to evaluate how you will fit with their roster.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes a lot farther than just the individual testing of running the 40 or, you know, doing long jumps and stuff like that, which some of these things don't even apply to the quarterback position. I don't care how high Spencer Rattler can jump. That's rarely going to come into play when he's playing quarterback at the NFL. But being in a pro day environment where you have coaches, and we talked to Dow Loggins, and Shane Beamer was there, you know, walking around. So being able to talk to these individual coaches that have been with Spencer Rattler on a day in, day out basis, get the idea of what he is as a player in practice, as a leader in the locker room, those kind of things. Then you have the individual one-on-one sessions where they kind of pick his brain a little bit and, you know, ask him to break down film or give an analysis of a defense, those kind of things, which I feel like Spencer Rattler, very smart guy, and we've had him in here to talk ball plenty of times. I think that's where he's really going to impress people, as well as his knowledge for the game. And it also helps when you have an offensive coordinator that roughly spent 2 decades in the NFL prior to this, that has those connections, that can talk to people, that can tell them what they want to hear about a guy like Spencer Rattler, who is being projected to be that late 2nd round, maybe early 3rd round, you know, type of guy.
I look around the NFL right now, and I think like a Seattle or a New Orleans would be a really good fit where they don't have to make that move right away.
Sure.
they have someone in place that, if Spencer needed to sit 3 years before he felt like he was caught up to the speed of the NFL, it would work in those places.
I've heard New Orleans as being one of those teams that people throw out there a lot with Spencer Rattler, and obviously they've paid Derek Carr a boatload of money, so he's not going anywhere anytime soon. But he's somebody that, from an injury standpoint, you do want to have a solid backup in place there. And Spencer Rattler,
they lost Jameis yesterday.
That's right, they did lose Jameis. So where's he going to be eating W's now?
He will now be eating W's in Cleveland. So
okay, well, have
I
fun
guess
with
going
that,
on a
Jameis.
diet.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, definitely so. But so bringing in somebody like Spencer Rattler as a serviceable backup for Derek Carr, I think would make a lot of sense. And he's a guy that I don't think the development's a long way off, but having him, like you said, being able to sit for maybe 2 or 3 years, which I very much wish more teams would do.
Sure.
So many teams.
Look at how it benefited Jordan Love in Green Bay.
Exactly. So many teams. Like Green Bay has a history of doing that.
Sure.
Obviously did the same thing with Aaron Rodgers before Brett Favre retired for the first time. But so many teams throw these guys out to the wolves right away. And sometimes it's even in those 3rd and 4th round picks. I mean, Russell Wilson won the job over Matt Flynn as a 4th round pick back in 2012. So he definitely earned that spot. But some of these guys get thrown to the wolves when they're definitely not ready. So bringing in Spencer Rattler and saying, okay, Derek Carr's our guy for however many more years his contract is. Maybe in 2026 or 2027, we'll turn the reins over to you. By then, he has the experience. He's up at the speed of the game. Probably has gotten a start or two at that point in time from injuries or whatever it may be from Derek Carr. And theoretically would be ready to go whenever that day ends up coming.
So let's talk about the other big name at Pro Day. That's Xavier Legette. What did you see him doing, and how did you see teams reacting to his work today?
Yes, so Xavier Legette tested very well at the Combine, had the 4.340, which I think, or 4.2 something 40. I can't remember the exact time off the top of my head. So tested pretty well in those metrics. We were told that he bench pressed the 215, I believe, 24 times earlier on this morning. That was a session that we did not get to see. That information was relayed to us by Mike Yuba of Gamecock Central. So pretty good in that regard. We did get to see him do a little bit of the route running stuff with Spencer Rattler, and all that looked pretty crisp. I know route running is something that a lot of scouts are saying is going to need to be tweaked a little bit and worked on once he gets to the next level. And he's a guy that very much so, kind of in a way of Spencer Rattler, was not on a lot of people's draft charts going into this season, but quickly shot up as soon as he started playing the way that he did, and ended up being a big part of this offense this past year and one of the best in the SEC as a whole. So he's a guy that I think has solidified himself to being one of those late first round, maybe early second round type of guys, just kind of depending on what teams are there and what their availabilities are. But everything that I saw today from a catching standpoint, didn't see any issues, and I think it's just going to further solidify him as one of those guys that should be taken pretty early in the draft.
Nick Gargiulo is a guy that probably is going to end up going early day 3. I think a lot of people believe he's a center, so it's not as easy for guys like you and me to assess what the drills are that O-linemen are getting put through and how they look in these days. What did you see? How did you see teams reacting to him?
Yeah, so I was only able to see him run a little bit of the 40-yard dash. They were doing the individual drills kind of on the other side of things, but he's a guy that when it comes to his specific, individual drills and stuff like that, I don't think it's necessarily going to blow people away.
Yeah.
Dude went to Yale, though, is very, very smart, very football smart. We've had him in here on Garnet Trust Hours and been able to talk to him and kind of pick his brain a little bit on the ins and outs of football. And I think, again, kind of similar to Spencer Rattler, I think he's going to impress a lot of people when it comes to those individual meetings, breaking things down on a whiteboard and stuff like that. And he's got good size. He's a very big guy, kind of gives you that size that you're looking for at the NFL level, and is obviously very, very teachable and coachable to that point. So he may not even end up getting drafted. If he does, it's going to be one of the later rounds. But I definitely think he's one of those guys that no matter where he ends up landing, can stick around in a camp once he gets in there and can really show people what he's made of.
Well, I'm really glad you said that. You pointed that out. He may not end up getting drafted. It is those times where you get to be on a whiteboard in front of NFL scouts, when you get to talk to these guys one-on-one, that they really start to make those decisions about how they are going to use their undrafted free agent slots. Because, if you are a team, you are evaluating, okay, do we think this guy can last after rookie camp? Do we think there's a shot he can last after rookie camp? If you are Nick, if you are any player in that position, you're also assessing, do these guys want to do what it is I do well, and are there opportunities on the depth chart? And I think a lot of how you assess that how you assess that second part, are there opportunities for me on the depth chart, are going to be based on your interactions at your pro day in these individual meetings.
Yeah, absolutely. You get kind of a sense of what teams are going to be looking for as well as where you slide in should you end up on the roster. And look, all these guys believe if they get a shot in a camp or something like that, they're going to be able to show out and going to be able to stick around. Obviously, it doesn't end up working out for everybody, but again, kind of assessing your situation and think about being undrafted free agent, as opposed to getting drafted. Sometimes you have multiple options. You can kind of pick which situation is the best for you based on the conversations that you have with these teams. So again, while today may not necessarily land Nick Gargiulo as a drafted player, it could still get him on an NFL roster at the end of the day, which is the most important thing.
So paint the picture for people, because I think people just envision this as the dudes throwing in shorts and a T-shirt surrounded by every NFL logo polo shirt that there is. Are there also like CFL and UFL scouts there as well?
I did not see anybody with that kind of branding. I imagine there were. And again, you're just talking about a horde of people standing out there on the field. So it's kind of hard to pick apart. But I imagine there was probably some of those guys. And that is an interesting thing. And we ended up talking to Jabari Ellis, who's a former South Carolina player himself that spent the past couple seasons in the CFL, now is coming back for hopefully a second opportunity in the NFL after he spent a cup of coffee with the Giants coming out of college. But I imagine there are those guys out there as well. And that's kind of the cool thing about having leagues like that where, hey, everybody wants to go to the NFL. They want to make the money and play for the premier football league in the entire world. But if you don't end up making it, if you get cut in camp or don't end up making roster, you can go to the United Football League. You can go to the CFL and continue on in your pro career with the hope of maybe making it back onto an NFL roster someday. So if a guy like Nick Gargiulo for some reason didn't get drafted, didn't get picked up as an undrafted free agent, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers may say, hey, we liked what we saw out of you under your individual pro day. Come up here, play with us for a season, and then you can try your hand at the NFL again.
Right. Yeah. I mean, look, it is always about opportunity, right? And the best way to create opportunity is not sitting on your couch. It's earning a paycheck somewhere else. We have obviously talked a whole lot of football today. The last 2 days, there have been a lot of talk, or has been a lot of talk, about Dawn Staley and the women's team, but the men are getting ready to start the SEC tournament as well. Lamont Paris has his hardware, so what is on the line in Nashville? We will dive into that when we come back. That's Tyler Head. I'm Dimitri Ravanis. This is the Halftime Show on 107.5 The Game and on the Game Network.
Welcome back in. Halftime show. Tyler and Dimitri going up until 3 o'clock. Quick reminder, as always, you can listen to us on 107.5 The Game here in Columbia, 100.3 The Game out in Myrtle Beach, 100.5 The Game out in Florence. Watching us as well on The Game TV, sponsored by our friends over at Shepherd's Glass, and listen to us on the 107.5 The Game app. Or go to your respective app store, download us, and take us with us wherever you go.
Wherever it is you're listening to us, coming up in about 10 to 12 minutes or so, we'll be talking to Jerry Palm, prognosticator extraordinaire at CBS, and he is going to answer the question for us, Tyler, as we bear down on the Gamecocks and everybody else getting ready to tip off in Nashville. What is the best case and worst case scenario for this team? The best case is obviously they win the SEC tournament, but what does that mean in terms of the NCAA tournament? Joe Lunardi says as of right now, the Gamecocks are a 5 seed, probably going to play in Pittsburgh. Palm says right now the Gamecocks are a 5 seed, probably going to play in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I feel like South Carolina's, seeding can't change all that drastically this weekend. Now, yeah, if you lose to Arkansas or Vanderbilt in your quarterfinal game, in your first round game on Thursday, maybe you have the possibility of dropping down to a 6. And if you were able to run the table and walk away with the SEC tournament championship by Sunday, then maybe you jump up to another 4. But I really don't see this taking too big of a swing. I know, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, a lot of people are very hesitant when it comes to 5 seeds because inevitably a 12 always ends up getting a 5. That always happens in just about every single NCAA tournament. But I feel like South Carolina's in a pretty good spot. They've kind of floated around that 5 to 6 range most of the year, at least in the past couple of months here in SEC play, as far as what their projections are, which, at the end of the day, the biggest thing to me is the fact that you're going into the SEC tournament not having to worry about winning X number of games or doing X or Y to ensure that you're going to get in the tournament. You go in there, I don't want to say stress-free because you still want to win some games and improve your resume a little bit, but you don't have to worry about getting bounced if you don't win a game this upcoming weekend.
I think the top 6 teams in the conference are very firmly in the NCAA tournament. Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, Auburn, Carolina, those are all absolute locks. I think Georgia is a lock. Or I'm sorry, not Georgia, but Florida is a lock as well. A&M, LSU, actually LSU probably doesn't have a prayer. A&M, Mississippi State, and Ole Miss, all have a lot to gain.
Yeah, and I think Mississippi State was dinged pretty significantly by losing to South Carolina this past weekend in the final game of the regular season. They're probably going to need to put together a win or two this upcoming weekend, as well as some of those other teams that you mentioned there. Look, if anybody runs the table and wins the whole thing, boom, you're in automatically. That's very unlikely to happen. That's going to end up going to the likes of Alabama or Tennessee or something like that, as it usually, tends to do. But, nothing's impossible, and you can catch fire at the right time. We'll see what happens this weekend.
I mean, here's the reason I don't rule out the possibility that the Gamecocks could climb a bit this week is if they make their run all the way. Let's just say they get to the final. Let's even put winning it all to the side for a second. To get to the final, they are going to have to beat Auburn. They are probably going to have to beat Tennessee. Those are teams right now sitting on the 4 line and the 2 line, respectively.
Yes.
Those are considerably better wins than a lot of teams in the country will have the opportunity to have at this point.
And those are 2 teams that just beat you both in the past couple weeks. Now, the Auburn thing, you were on the road, tough environment to play there at Neville Arena. Even if you do rematch with them, I think a lot of people view that as, hey, don't get beat by 40 points this time. You feel pretty good coming away from it. In Tennessee, obviously, you had a tough game with them a couple weeks back here at Colonial Life Arena with the opportunity. It was just last week, actually, with the opportunity to maybe at least lay claim to part of the SEC regular season crown. It was very tucking back and forth, and he came up just short, but you did beat them on the road in Knoxville earlier on the season, so certainly nothing is impossible. And I think that's what, is so fun about this team is they've shown you the ability to beat any kind of opponent this season. So theoretically, if you told me they went and ran the table and won the SEC tournament this upcoming weekend, I'm not going to sit here and say I'd be absolutely floored by it.
Yeah, so then let's talk about what happens in the final. If they get to the final, they are most likely to meet either Alabama, who won by a miracle on Saturday and is really starting to come down, a Kentucky team you've already beaten once by double digits, and a Florida team that you have already beaten by, I don't think it was double digits. I think it was a high single-digit win, but still a Florida team that you beat pretty soundly the first time around. There is no scenario in which you just dismiss the possibility that Carolina could win this tournament.
No, absolutely. And again, they've shown you the ability to play with just about anybody this season. And the fact you're also doing it in a neutral environment up there in Nashville certainly, can change things a little bit. Because again, Auburn is a very, very different team away from Neville Arena. This season, very few teams go in there and win those games. So we'll see what happens if South Carolina ends up matching up with them in their second round game coming up on Friday, the quarterfinals. But you got to get through either Arkansas or Vanderbilt coming up first on Thursday, depending on which teams end up winning coming up tomorrow in the first round games. But South Carolina beat both those teams this year. I think that's a very favorable matchup either way. And again, from a confidence standpoint, just being able to say you at least won a game in the SEC tournament, I think holds weight as you head into the NCAA tournament.
I think you and I talked about this in January when the team was getting ready to start conference play, and they were sitting there at 12-1, and the KenPom ratings were not super kind to them. The quadrant victories were not super kind to them. They're sitting at number 47 right now. I think they are pretty firmly a 5 seed, maybe a 6 seed if they lose to either Arkansas or Vanderbilt in game one, because those are two teams you already have very, very dominating wins over. You probably do not want to lose to them right now.
Right.
But sitting at number 47 in the KenPom ratings, when you consider all of the teams that are going to get the automatic bid by winning a conference that is not on the level of the SEC, it doesn't feel... it doesn't feel like volatility is out of the question. It's just hard, I think, for you and I to imagine right now.
Yeah, and we've kind of had this running joke that the net rankings hate South Carolina because they continue to fall despite the fact that they win. And even that Florida game that you mentioned the other week, Florida went up by losing, and South Carolina, I think either stayed status quo or dropped a point, which there's a lot that goes into those rankings and stuff like that, and it's very confusing to keep up with all of it. But South Carolina, again, I'm looking at it right now, they've dropped all the way down to 49 after winning another game this past weekend. So you do have to take those with a little bit of grain of salt because it's not the end all be all. At the end of the day, you do have a committee of people that are looking at these teams when it's all said and done and deciding who's going to be in the NCAA tournament. And again, that goes back to my main point. You're a South Carolina team that's going into the game this weekend not having to worry about winning 3 or 4 games to lock yourself into the NCAA tournament. You at least go in there with the peace of mind saying, hey, regardless of what happens, worst comes to worst, we're still playing in the big dance.
I think Kentucky is peaking at the absolute right time. I think Alabama is a team that is capable of playing at either 100 or 0, depending on the day. I think that those are the two teams that really seem to be the biggest roadblock to Carolina. There's no reason, I think, to pick against the Gamecocks playing for the SEC title.
There's not. And again, this is such a competitive league in the SEC where you can have anybody in that top echelon beat anybody at any point in time. So, if you told me that Kentucky, who has a little bit of a hot hand right now, goes in there and wins the SEC tournament, I wouldn't say I'd be shocked by it. If Tennessee won it and is one of the best 4 teams in the country, I wouldn't be shocked by that either. And like I said, if South Carolina found a way to pull it off themselves, I don't think I'd be shocked by that as well.
Well, a guy that knows what all of the results mean in the long term much better than us is Jerry Palm. He is set to join us next. That is Tyler Head. I am Dimitri Ravanis. This is the Halftime Show on 107.5 The Game and The Game Network.
Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler and Dimitri along with you on this Tuesday afternoon. It is indeed time for the greatest day in the history of the world. We will try and get to Jerry Palm here shortly. But first, let's go back. Kind of a similar thing that we did yesterday where we talked about March the 11th being the day that the NBA officially suspended the rest of its season back in 2020. On this day, March 12th, 2020, is when both the men's and women's NCAA basketball tournaments were canceled, which I think, and look, the NBA thing sent a shockwave through the entire sports world that, wow, if a professional sports league is shutting things down, we're in trouble. And I don't remember at what point in the day the NCAA tournament got shut down. It was very early on in the day, and that was kind of the second domino to fall, I guess. Because, I mean, at that point in time, like baseball hadn't started back. Obviously, the NFL was not in season. Then all the other started to fall, these other sports leagues kind of falling in place after the after the NBA. But there was some optimism because they had already announced that the NCAA tournament was going to be played without fans. Like, well, at least maybe we can get the tournament, though the environments won't be there. We'll at least get to see some basketball. And obviously that quickly went out the door.
Well, obviously it was far and away the biggest thing that we were waiting on at that point. It was the first, I don't want to say major event to fall, because when you're losing sporting events, like it's unprecedented, but it was the beginning of, this is definitely going to really impact the way that a lot of us in this country measure time, right? My biggest fear the whole time was no football, because I don't think Americans, even ones that are not football fans, realize what a mechanism football is for the end of the year going by. Because if you're in a college market, every week is a countdown to Saturday. If you're an NFL fan, you're counting down to Thursday, and then it's an easy bridge to Sunday and then Monday, right? And without that, it was going to feel like it went on forever. And when the NCAA tournament got canceled, that all felt very real for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we went through so many months of uncertainty, and originally the Alliance had their seasons not starting until the spring, and the SEC quickly went, no, I think we can come up with a better solution. We obviously ended up playing football that fall, but even going back to that fall, because the first games didn't end up getting played until the end of September, for those that don't remember. So Labor Day weekend, which is usually the kickoff of college football, was devoid of football, and that in and of itself was weird. Now we still had the optimism, okay, we're only a couple weeks away, but even going through those first couple of weeks of when we usually have football being played, not having it was like, all right, this is pretty bizarre.
We are looking for Jerry Palm. Looks like we're going to have him here in just a moment on 107.5 The Game and the Game Network. I will tell you, looking at various people's bracketology as we head into the SEC tournament, it does seem pretty clear that A&M is the team with the most to prove and gain in Nashville this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we bring in Jerry Palm now, we'll shift here to South Carolina really quick. Jerry, first of all, thanks so much for taking a little bit of your time for us this afternoon. This is a South Carolina team that, as we've talked about, is going into the SEC tournament knowing they are going to be locked in to March Madness, no matter if they win all their games or lose the first one out against either Arkansas or Vanderbilt. What is the ceiling and what's the floor as far as seeding goes for South Carolina, and how can that be affected this weekend for them?
Yeah, it depends on how far they go, of course. They have a kind of an odd resume. They didn't play a very strong schedule outside the league. New coach, new team makes sense. A lot of new coaches will do that. And then, they didn't get a strong conference schedule either, because they got Kentucky, Auburn, and Alabama just once each, and that's three of the four best teams in the league. So they need to show that they can play some of these better teams off their home floor. And if they can do that, they have some real upward mobility with their seed. Obviously, the first game, that's a must-win. Otherwise, South Carolina could find themselves in the middle of the bracket somewhere. But as you start to beat some of these better teams as you progress through the tournament, they have a chance for some, I think, significant upward mobility, because it starts to fill a hole in their tournament resume.
Looking at bracketologies, you always have to be careful, because no matter who it is that's putting them together, it's like NFL draft projections, right? Nothing has actually happened yet. So there is nobody ahead or behind, but it does seem like pretty universal, regardless of who you're looking at, that Mississippi State and Texas A&M are the two teams with the most at stake this week in Nashville.
Yeah, in terms of getting in the field, yes. Mississippi State, I've got in, but they're, I think, pretty clearly on the bubble, and it would be nice for them if they could, pick up a quality win or two as well. to really feel comfortable. I think they start with LSU, and LSU doesn't help them, but losing to LSU could certainly hurt them. And then I don't know. I have to get the bracket in front of me, so I don't know who's after that. But they have opportunities ahead, and A&M starts with Ole Miss. And again, for A&M, it's about stacking wins because they played a really good schedule. The problem is, they were about a 500 team in each of the three quadrants, and they have 4, I think, quad 3 losses, and that's a lot to overcome. But they beat Tennessee, they beat Iowa State, so they beat some good teams, but now they may have to beat a couple more to feel comfortable on Selection Sunday.
We're talking to CBS's prognosticator extraordinaire, Jerry Palm. Obviously, with the SEC tournament getting ready to start tomorrow, there is a lot at stake for the Gamecocks and everybody else.
So Tennessee obviously wrapped up the SEC regular season crown last week after beating South Carolina, going in as the top seed to the tournament this upcoming weekend, and listed in the latest bracketology as one of the number 1 seeds going into the tournament. Are they locked into that for sure? Do they still need to win a game or two this weekend to make sure that they hold on to that one of those number 1 spots?
They may have to win all of them to make sure they hold on to the number 1 spot, because it's a pretty competitive situation with North Carolina. And if only one of them is a conference champion, that team is probably the 4th number 1. For Tennessee, the question is, would you rather be the 4th number 1 but playing in the West, or would you rather be a number 2 and playing closer to home? And some coaches actually would prefer to be the lower seed and play closer to home. I don't know how Rick Barnes feels about it, but that doesn't mean you're not going to try to win your tournament, because you're always going to try to win. But a conference tournament championship for Tennessee probably means the 4th number 1 seed. But it's far from a lock.
I want to look, we obviously are mostly a South Carolina fan audience, but because we're on around the state, we do have a few Clemson fans here and there listed. You mentioned North Carolina. I do want to ask you sort of about where the reputation of the ACC is. This is the historic basketball conference across all colleges, and it doesn't look like a lot of teams can really count themselves firmly in at this point from that conference.
Yeah, you're right. Carolina and Duke, of course. Clemson is a top half of the bracket team. So those 3, but may only be those 3. It's you've got Wake Forest and Pitt are the next 2. I don't have either of them in my bracket. They could meet in a quarterfinal of the ACC tournament. It's hard to really come up with teams that in this league that have something to play for in this tournament, other than short of winning it. Who are you going to get in? Maybe Virginia Tech could make a run to a final, playing the best teams they possibly could, and not have to win a final to get in. But we haven't seen the Virginia Tech team yet that's capable of doing that.
So a story that's captivated a lot of the country is what's been going on with Indiana State. They won the Missouri Valley Conference. As far as the regular season goes, end up losing to Drake in that conference championship. Drake, another very capable team. When you're talking about one of those one big leagues, though, like the Missouri Valley Conference is, people don't really know if Indiana State's going to be able to make the field of 68. They're currently sitting in the last 4 in category. How do you see that playing out, and what games should we be looking at this weekend to determine if the Sycamores make it or not?
Yeah, I don't have them in my last 4 in, but I have them out. Their chances are slim. It's just always been that way. They don't play enough good teams outside their league. Didn't get any quality wins outside their league. They played Alabama and Michigan State both on the road, of course. Double-digit wins for Alabama and Michigan State. So, the worst thing that actually happened to Indiana State this year was getting ranked, because they lost both their games they played that week, and that was their 2 worst losses of the season. And if they just lose one of those games, and don't take the quad 4 loss, for example, we might be having a different conversation. Really, the only hope that I hold out for Indiana State, and I'm from Indiana, so I'd love to see them get in, is that in 2019. The committee took Belmont in a similar situation, and Belmont did not have a resume nearly as good as Indiana State's. So, of course, Indiana State's competing against different teams for the tournament that Belmont did that year. But maybe the committee will recognize the kind of season that Indiana State had and feel that one of the teams that belongs to the tournament.
The great Jerry Palm of CBS, one of the truly great prognosticators, both during bowl season for college football and as we get ready for the NCAA tournament. We'll end where we began, Jerry, and that is in Nashville for the SEC tournament. Before you came on, I said that I thought there was no reason South Carolina fans should not expect the Gamecocks to be playing in the conference final. I think Kentucky and Alabama are the two most volatile teams in this tournament, the two that really could win it all or walk away disappointed after their first game. What do you think?
Yeah, volatile is a good word. For Alabama, it's because they live and die by the three.
Right.
We got to see them up in Toronto this year when they played Purdue, and they just everything is on the perimeter, or they drive to the basket, but you don't do that much against Purdue. But so when you live and die by the three, you tend to be volatile. And Kentucky is volatile in part because of its youth, but they've really played well of late. But you're right. I mean, Kentucky could win the whole thing. If they do, they might even be a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, or they could go out early. And the same is true in the NCAA tournament. But I don't know that I want to see Kentucky in my part of the bracket, because when it comes to pure talent, nobody matches Kentucky.
You could read his stuff at cbssports.com. He's Jerry Palm. Jerry, appreciate you taking the time today, my friend.
All right, thanks.
All right. How do you feel after that conversation?
I feel like we kind of know where South Carolina stands. I don't think it changed too much. Again, I don't see them, rising or falling too drastically depending on what happens this upcoming weekend. I asked them the question about Indiana State because that's the story that's captivated the entire country. They got this Robert Avila guy that's kind of become almost like got a cult following for what he's been able to do.
Kareem
Abdul-Jabbar, Larry Blur, whatever you want to call him. And unfortunately, because they did lose that conference championship game to Drake the other day, they might be on the outside looking in despite having one of the best win totals in the entire country.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I take it you were looking at the ESPN bracketology when you said last four. Jerry doesn't even have them in first four out. Like that's going to be a really interesting story on Sunday night when the brackets are revealed. We're about to put the wraps on the show for today. That's Tyler Head. I'm Dimitri Ravanis. This is the Halftime Show on 107.5 The Game and The Game Network.
Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler and Dimitri along for a few more minutes. We're handing things over to Jay and Elijah for the post-game show. A reminder, Coach Beamer going to be joining Jay and Elijah coming up at 3:15. We'll give his recap and accounts of everything that went on out there at Pro Day as he was out there talking to plenty of scouts and plenty of coaches from the respective NFL teams that were in attendance earlier on today at the indoor football facility. And that actually leads us in to our Firehouse Subs text of the hour. Nameless texter weighs in, going back to our conversation. And obviously, we know that guys like Rattler and Leggett and stuff are going to get drafted at least in the middle rounds and, should be able to land on rosters pretty easily. But we, and I talked about this with Wes a little bit earlier on this morning, a lot of guys that when you do a pro day situation thing like this, maybe end up landing as special teams guys in the NFL and making careers out of that. Look at it like a Matthew Slater, who literally has made an entire career out of being a special teams guy up there in New England. Nameless Texture weighs in and says special teams contributors matter in the NFL, and some guys will stick because they can make those plays. And look at a guy like Miriam Brown, who I believe ran a 4.340 earlier on today, has the opportunity. He was a very good punt returner when he was healthy this past season for the Gamecocks. Kieran Joyner, kind of a Swiss Army knife, a guy that can do a little bit of everything. He's played just about every skill position on this team in his time here at South Carolina. He's somebody that could stick as a special teams guy because he also did that as well, playing as a gunner and a couple other different things. So it's not the most glamorous way to get on an NFL roster, but it's a way to stick around the league.
But it's a way to get on the roster, and that is 50% of the battle. I do want to go back to our conversation with Jerry Palm as we put the wraps on the show today, Tyler, because we mentioned this in our conversation. The net rating for Carolina is 49, and this is what makes it hard, I think, to do the job that Jerry Palm and his counterpart at ESPN, Joe Lunardi, do with bracketology, because that net rating of 49, I want to read you Jerry's first four teams out. First four teams not to make it.
All right.
Utah, net rating, 52. Iowa, net rating, 60. A&M, net rating, 46. Pitt, net rating, 44. It's so hard for me when it comes to basketball, baseball, women's soccer. It's so hard for me to follow exactly what it is the net ratings mean, because in some cases it means you're not strong enough. And then you have cases like Duke, whose net rating is 68.
Right.
That's a top 3 seed.
What is it? Whose line is it anyway? Where the rules don't make sense or something doesn't make sense and the rules are made up?
Right.
I feel like that's kind of what we look at when we look at the net rankings, because it does seem like different rules apply for different teams. And just kind of looking at, you mentioned Texas A&M being above South Carolina in the net rankings despite having 7 more losses than them. When you look at their quad one, record, they're 5-6 against quad one opponents. So they obviously have played more than South Carolina, but South Carolina's record against quad one opponents is a little bit better when you factor in the fact that they are 4-4. So a few less games, but they do have, a better win percentage against those teams than what A&M has. So again, it's really hard to break this down because there's a lot of factors that go into these net rankings, which again, it's a good thing it's not the end all be all of who gets in the tournament and who doesn't. It is something that's weighted in very, very heavily. But if you try and understand the net rankings to their full potential, you're going to be beating your head against the wall at the end of the day.
It is one of the reasons that you like having a committee, whether it is the NCAA tournament, College World Series, College Football Playoff, because if this were just boiled down to a number, on the one hand, it's very understandable. Everybody knows exactly what it is they have to do to be a part of the field. But on the other hand, if it were boiled down to just a number, you couldn't look at like Alabama's a really good example because they're at double-digit losses and say, yeah, but when they're on.
Right.
And I think that is a really important part of seeding teams in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I don't envy the people that have to be on these committees to decide these things. It's hard enough to decide who the best 4 teams in college football is, soon to be best 12 and eventually best 14, I guess, here in a couple of years. But to try and hammer down the best 68 teams in college football when there's so much disparity between conferences and between skill level and between strength of schedule and all that kind of stuff, I can't imagine the process of deciding who the best 68 teams are.
And it's look, I understand why the guys on that committee and gals in a lot of cases, I understand why they do things that don't make sense, meaning they apply that transitive property value. Because if you're looking at Florida State, let's say, in the college football playoff, their best win was Alabama's third win. Is that enough? No, but it does make a difference when one is undefeated and the other's only losses to a team that is in the tournament, right?
Yeah.
So as that relates to college basketball going forward, and as it relates to the Gamecocks specifically, yeah, it is totally fair to have questions about that non-conference schedule. Absolutely fair.
Sure. The difference is between like the college football playoff and the NCAA tournament is when you're talking about splitting hairs between number 68 and number 69, there's usually enough blemishes on the resume for 69 or whoever else is after them. Say, okay, we can point to several things here of why you're not in the tournament, as opposed to a Florida State that did everything that was asked of them. They just happened to not be in one of the stronger conferences this year and be without their starting quarterback.
Well, for the men, one thing we know for sure is they will not be in what has unfortunately become something of a too familiar position, which is, hey, are we showing up for the NIT game this week?
Yeah, that's right. So things could be worse. So South Carolina in a good position to head into the NCAA tournament after the SEC tournament. That'll do it for today's edition of the Halftime Show. He's Dimitri. I'm Tyler. Coming up next, it's the postgame show with Jay and Elijah. Coach Beamer joining them at 3:15 right here on The Game.
All right.